Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoy. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello, everyone. Today, my guests are Dr. Tobi Zausner and Dr. Stan Krippner. Dr. Zausner is a research psychologist, a clinician in private practice, and an award-winning visual artist with works in major museums in private collections around the world. Dr. Zausner writes and lectures widely on psychology and human potential at academic conferences, charitable events, as well as teaching in graduate programs. Dr. Krippner has published numerous papers, book chapters, and books. He is a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He has lectured and published widely on human potential, parapsychology and transpersonal psychology, indigenous healing, and humanistic psychology. Dr. Zausner is the author of the new book, The Creative Trance. Dr. Krippner is the author of a paper entitled Trance and the Trickster. He also has an upcoming autobiography entitled A Chaotic Life. Today we are holding a conversation on the Creative Trance and the Trickster. Dr. Zausner, Dr. Krippner, welcome.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe as kind of food for thought here, reading both your paper, Dr. Krippner, and Tobi, your book, I had this kind of general impression that there is a hegemony of waking consciousness in the Western mindset that has eclipsed the natural inner landscape of reverie and imagination that we still bump up against with indigenous cultures and in the arts. Trance states are implicit in all creative endeavors, including big C and little c creativity. This natural landscape is always there for people, to paraphrase William Blake, whether they will or they won't. It's kind of like a counterweight to the Apollonian daylight-oriented culture we live in, the Dionysian aspect of the psyche. We crave it more and more the less we have it, and yet it is so little nurtured or esteemed in our current culture, unless it holds the ability to make more money. It is also a liminal space of not knowing, where one enjoys the not knowing and experiences and lets arise what will arise in the mind, or the dance steps, or the pen or brush stroke to facilitate the Archimedes eureka. That was kind of what came as I was kind of mulling over the paper and the book. And I have to admit, I did see you at APA presenting on these topics. I love the topics. So that's why I brought you here to talk today. So maybe that's something we can use to make things get cooking here in the conversation.
I think that piece of writing was beautiful, Scott, and it's so true. It really encapsulates our society. And what you said is that we've lost touch very often with our inner lives. And that's where our healing comes from.
Yeah. Well, maybe one or both of you could kind of talk about that inner life and its relationship to healing.
Dan, would you like to go first on inner life and indigenous people and healing?
Oh, go ahead. I'll listen. Okay.
Okay. I have written 2 books on inner life and healing, in a sense. My first book was it was When Walls Become Doorways, Creativity in the Transforming Illness, because illness transforms our life. And in doing so, it heals us and it lifts us to the next level. And very often our lives can be made better through what appears to be a life-threatening illness. Our work can improve, our lives can improve, and we grow as people. And I'm always interested in creativity because I've been a painter since I'm 3.5 years old, Scott, an artist.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and I've been a daydreamer my whole life. So it's not surprising I would write a book on the creative trance. And, you had once asked me what the writing process was like. It's hard. I'm dyslexic. So I write very slowly. I make many mistakes, but I want the words to be beautiful and clear, easily available to dyslexic people like myself and to all people. Because the basis of writing and my writing is to help others and make their world better and empower them. And this way it enriches their lives. We all have enormous inner strength. And we don't always contact it, but we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that if I look back through my life, which I've had a lot of hard, regrets. I've had a few and a lot of hard knocks, but those hard knocks, I think, are actually the bumping up against assumptions we have about the world and having to become creative or flexible cognitively, right? And I think that those are the spots where those growth edges.
Yeah, those hard knocks shape our character.
Yeah.
We're and you asked, is creative trance part of the process of writing? It's part of the process of all creativity. And there are so many types of creative trances. And the most frequent is the daydream. And of course, daydreams have actually changed the world. Einstein had a daydream at age 16 that he was riding a light beam, and it later became a basis for the theory of relativity. But of course, daydreaming got him in trouble in school, and his teachers told his parents the boy was slow and would never amount to anything because he daydreams all the time. But, we see this, the Nobel Prize winning cytogeneticist Barbara McClintock. She actually envisioned herself in the corn cells she was studying. She saw them as friends, and she could see the mobility of their elements. And that mobility of elements was a theory that won her the Nobel. And, there seem to be levels of creative trance. Some are very light, like doodling, but doodling is very relaxed. And they go to a middle level and a very deep level. And a deep level can be when it is a sort of total immersion, when nothing exists except a creative person and the work produced. And we can see this in Roger Bannister when he was running to break the 4-minute mile. He said he didn't feel any pain, just a great unity of movement. And he said the world seemed to stand still or it didn't exist. And the only reality for him was the next 200 yards of track in front of him beneath his feet. And sometimes a creative trance can come in sleep and dreams, and the associated hypnagogic and hypnopompic states. And the Benin people of Africa, they believe that the deity Olokun inspires creativity through states of reverie, daydreaming, and dreams. And the Australian Aborigines, dream time for them is both an altered state of consciousness, but dream time is also a parallel world of gods and ancestors. And they enter the state of dream time to make their work. And the mathematician Srinivas Ramanujan said that for him, the goddess Namagiri came to him in his dreams at night. He was one of the great mathematicians of all time. She would give him formulas. He would keep a notebook by his bed, and then he would have to work out the formulas. It would take him months sometimes. But he credited her with his inspiration. Elias Howe dreamt the solution to his invention of the sewing machine in a dream. And Mary Shelley, she had trouble sleeping one hot summer night, and in a hypnagogic state, she saw images that later became her novel, Frankenstein. She saw the scientist bending over an unholy creature. And the contralto, Marian Anderson, said that the time before sleep was when she lived in the mood of the music and that she became lost in the spirit of the song. So, would you like me to continue with altered state?
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay. Sometimes in a creative trance, people, one of the interesting things is that people have the experience of an outside locus of inspiration. Like the inventor Thomas Edison said, he said, people have always said, I'm so creative, I create things. He said, I've created nothing. All I am is a receiving apparatus, a record on a plate. And Puccini said that the music for his opera, Madame Butterfly, was dictated to him by God. And he said I was merely instrumental in putting it on paper. And Stevie Wonder also sees his music coming from a divine source. He also says, I'm only being used as a vehicle. But he believes it's an honor to do it, he says. And I never forget the honor. And for me, one of the most interesting aspects of the creative trance is when the work seems to come alive. I mean, psychologically, we can say these are psychological projections and the unconscious takes over. And of course, the unconscious being a vast parallel processor is much more effective than the conscious mind. And so every creative person I know, we all give into it. I mean, my paintings tell me what to do, even if I don't agree. And we can see it in Alice Walker, the novelist. When she was working on her novel, The Color Purple, the characters complained to her about living in Brooklyn. They didn't like it there. They said, too many tall buildings. So she moved to San Francisco. They didn't like it there either. Finally, she moved to Boonville, Northern California. And that was more like the rural setting of the book. And they were so happy. Her characters became friendly and talkative again. She said they would sit wherever I would sit and just talk, and they were obliging, engaging, and jolly. So it's trance pervades our lives. Even when our books, people in the book don't come alive for us, it's always with us. Whenever we're creative, contemplative, or imaginative, or become lost in the world of a task, a daydream, or memories. I mean, even finding a new route home, because there's a lot of traffic, and you're in the car, and you visualize, should I take this street? Should I take that street? Should I take the highway? That's a creative trend. Yeah, and we are in it all the time.
And yet, it seems that there's not much affirming it for us in at least in Western culture, right? At least it's what we call Western culture now.
Absolutely. There is not much affirming it because, as you say, we're such an Apollonian society, and trance is seen as Dionysian. And but Dionysius was a god of rebirth. Look at the vine. It's cut down every year, and it comes back in beautiful bloom, so that creativity is also a place of rebirth. We rebirth ourselves with our creative efforts. We're reborn through our work. And this takes place in a trance state. I think people are afraid of the word trance because they think of the commercial use in entertainment where people are made to bark like a dog or something. But this is very different. Just as clinical trance and clinical hypnosis is therapeutic, trance is really an integral part of our existence.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Stanley. Need this for you.
Oh, I heard.
Stanley. I think that somebody might be calling you there, Stanley. Don't worry about that. I can always edit that out. I don't know if you heard that, Stan.
Yeah, as I said, we were speaking before. Creativity is so healing, and it's the basis for all the creative arts therapies. I mean, people get better when they dance. They can release trauma through body movement. Mm-hmm. They get better when they make pottery. I love it. I mean, it's so enjoyable, and it's also analgesic. Creativity diminishes the experience of pain. There was a Canadian folk artist, Maud Lewis, that they made a film of her, Maudie, and she was so disabled from continued juvenile osteoarthritis that she was in pain all the time, except when she painted, because her focus was on the work, and she could only hold the brush in a very unusual way because of her hand difficulties. But she said, as long as I have a brush in front of me, I'm all right. And the kimono designer and fabric designer, Ichiku Kaboto, said that he believed his time of hepatitis was the most crucial for his art. It changed him and it changed his work. Illness can change the creative trends for the better. We often think of illness as so negative. But in my book, The Creative Trance, I show people doing good work even with dementia. You know, the beginnings of dementia. Iris Murdoch wrote Jackson's Dilemma at the beginning of Alzheimer's disease. And frontotemporal dementia can actually enhance musical and artistic creative trances. Ravel's Bolero, his most beloved work, was done at the beginning of frontotemporal dementia, beginning stages of the illness. And its great pounding rhythms are attributed to the influence of FTD.
Wow.
So, yeah. Anyway, but
yeah, as you're talking, and this is a kind of a testament to the cornucopia of knowledge that's in you about this, having studied this for so long. You must have been at this book for years, because it's not a large volume, but it is a cornucopia of all of this wonderful information: neuroscience information, creativity, divergent thinking information versus convergent thinking, or the combination. So it's a wonderful book, and I do recommend people who are interested in creativity or trance states or altered states or hypnosis to really pick up this book. It's great. But maybe what we could do as a jumping off point, kind of talk about the one thing I did really rereading your article, Stan, was the fact that indigenous cultures, according to your research, they really don't have words for creativity like we do, in the sense that it's something outside of the normal daily activities, I think. Is that correct, sir?
Well, I think that I should start by answering your question about writing style, because it ties in with your other questions. In recent years, my writing has changed. I've written so many articles on so many topics that when I agree to do a new article, I see what I've written in the past, and I retrieve that, and I use elements of that as a starting off point. So at this stage of my life, I do not start writing from scratch. I always have something, shall we say, to kickstart the process. And with the advent of artificial intelligence, there's a new element that's come into the picture. I had an invitation to give a talk at a conference on quantum physics and transpersonal psychology. Well, I've never written about that topic. I don't know enough about quantum physics to use that So what I did was to have a friend put a friend with artificial intelligence to put the words transpersonal psychology and quantum physics into a file. And minutes later, he came up with a 4-point manuscript, much better than what I could have written off the top of my head or even with studies, because artificial intelligence has access to so many similar writings on the topic. So, like I say, my writing style has changed in recent years, and those are the two examples that I could give. Now, back to my Trance and the Trickster article, I tried to make a couple of points from the perspective of evolutionary psychology. Humans are hardwired to do two things: to survive and to reproduce. Everything else feeds into those if it's to be maintained. And back in the days of early humans and the identification of the shaman or tribal healer, you had something that actually fed into the evolutionary process. The early healers would treat 6 people basically in 2 different ways. One way was with substances, medicines, drugs. One way was through ritual, ceremonies, and inductions. Now, sometimes the substances that were given had no medicinal value whatsoever, but they worked because the patient was suggestible. If the patient was not suggestible, it didn't work, and their genes dropped out of the gene pool. So, of course, there were many of the remedies that did have medicinal value, and from the point of view of medicine in the 21st century, we can see, yes, these things did have value. We all know the story about how leaves of the cinchona plant reduce pain. And we also know about how psychedelic substances would often trigger insight into a person's condition and save them from an early demise. Now, when it comes to ritual, again, humans are hardwired to make sense of their world. And so when the ritual gave an explanation of the illness and an explanation of the remedy, that worked, that satisfied the patient. And again, they had to use their imagination. They had to use their intuition to make that work. If they didn't have those capacities for suggestibility, capacities for imagination, capacities for making order out of chaos, again, their genes would drop out of the gene pool. So all of this really lays the basis for Tobi has done in her magnificent book. And I have to say that there are many writers on creativity who simply ignore the wealth of data that Tobi has presented. And I see this all the time. First of all, remember that this is volume 1 of Tobi's book. She has yet to address creativity in dreams, creativity in psychedelic states, Creativity Following Illness, etc., etc. Another book we'll look forward to. But again, let me just give you one example. There was a mathematician from India called Sunasari Ramanujan who came up with uncanny solutions to mathematical problems. And on the anniversary of his death a few years ago, full-page article in Science magazine about his contributions and on others as well. What they didn't mention is that he was able to solve these problems because he had a dream in which a Hindu goddess would come and give him the answers. He did this for years. And of course, he thanked the Hindu goddess. This is part of his ritual. Was that mentioned in the article? No, it was completely wiped out. So you don't read the source of his creativity. And that's why Tobi's book is so important to remind us that there are many roads to creativity. Some are completely conscious. Some of them draw upon unconscious material. Some of them are combinations. But this is a contribution to creativity studies that we simply cannot afford to ignore.
Well, I would just kind of adding to that. Yes, I having my dissertation and for my doctoral program was on creativity and hypnosis, and the majority of the information and the way it's operationalized is just as divergent thinking for creativity, rather than talking about trance states or the subjective experience of it. I think because of the way it's operationalized, so that you can test it with a Torrance test or a whatnot. I think it's just kind of the nature of the beast is kind of objectifying it rather than looking at the subjective experience of it as something that's qualitatively real.
Just because.
Well, go ahead, Toby. Yes.
No, I was just going to say, just because something seems intangible does not make it unreal.
Oh, correct. Yeah. You were going to say something, Steve?
What did you say?
Well, I was going to say that your professors were not wrong. They simply stopped their explanations too soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Actually, operational definitions are fine with me. I've given in my writings an operational definition of shamanism, for example, one that can be used to study shamans and to understand their role in their society. But you can't give an operational definition to something that is ignored. And so this was the flaw in your professor's arguments. They simply stopped too soon, at least in my opinion.
I think people do that because it frightens them. Because in our society, people have a fear of the unquantifiable. And or something they think they can't quantify. Probably you could quantify creative trance now with neuroimaging. And, they found that creativity takes the whole brain, not just, the default mode network. It just, but I think, it takes the visual cortex, the memory, the hippocampus, all of these brain areas. But Stan is right. We ignore this, but it doesn't mean that we don't exist with it. We trance, it's everywhere. It's a very unusual state. Like the creative trance it's distinct from the pathological states of catatonia, stupor, and daze and addiction. They're entropic. They have no productivity, but a creative trance, it's active passivity, and it's simultaneously dissociative and operational. And it's internally focused, but it's outwardly directed and highly functional. And, while people experience psychological ultimate reality, the creative people also able to operate in consensual reality and bring their insights back into waking life. And it's the paradox of opposites. And people are always, look at Stan, he's always using new media. Stan, you're using AI. This is fantastic.
Yes.
This is a creative person who continues to grow. This is, and it's through creativity, and creativity grows us as we grow through it. And, creative trance is like, they're like snowflakes, no trance state is ever the same. And they, even in the same person, they're different. In the same time, one moment to the next, just like Heraclitus said, you can't step into the same river twice because you're not the same person and it's not the same river. So, but we see in Stan how creativity is a whole lifetime, and he's still creating and making major work.
Maybe a bit of a jumping off point, since the spotlight's on you right now, Stan. You have a new book coming out with an intriguing title. I wonder if it's also a testament to how your writing has changed while you wrote your new autobiography. Because I read Song of the Siren some years ago, which was probably written back in the 70s, and the difference between this and that, I'm wondering what could that be?
Oh, good heavens! I think that my writing style has changed drastically since I wrote Song of the Siren many years ago. And I think that will be obvious when you read A Chaotic Life. I think that Song of the Siren had a lot of useful material in terms of mainly my parapsychological journey and experiments, but much of the information in that was very technical. And in my current book, A Chaotic Life, I tried not to make things too technical so to be easier reading. If people want to read something technical, they can go to the original articles, which I provide. So that is certainly the major way that the two books differ. Now, you ask about the title. This goes back to chaos theory, because chaos theory can explain so many of the paths that I took in life. And whether you know this or not, Tobi wrote a beautiful introduction to my autobiography, because she's more of an expert on chaos theory than I am. And you can see chaos theory as the thread that moves through all 50 chapters of that book. And especially when there is a change in initial conditions. There's initial condition, and you make a slight change, and sometimes it has unpredictable consequences. This is a so-called butterfly effect, a metaphor where a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world can eventually trigger a hurricane in another part of the world. Useful metaphor. And nothing in my life is as dramatic as cyclones and hurricanes, but little examples pop up all the time. When I was a kid, I enjoyed reading comics, and there was a comic on Merlin the Magician, and Merlin the Magician created his effects by hypnotizing people. Well, that got me interested in hypnosis, and then I traced how all of those events were connected, accumulating with me being an active hypnosis researcher in later years. So I think that again, it's remarkable that you have both Tobi and I on the same program, because we've collaborated in many ways, and certainly I'm grateful for the fine introduction she gave to my book.
No,
Thank
excellent.
You, it's a wonderful book.
I'm absolutely looking forward to reading it, and thrilled to know that you've written the introduction, Tobi. So, wow, yeah,
it was an honor for me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So creativity is a catalyst for things, or maybe a catalyst in life is like some chaos that shows up, right? An ordeal that you go through can create that catalyst for getting your dissolving old thinking, synthesis, antithesis, right? Kind of ideas, creating a synthesis from two different opposite ideas, or finding the similarities between two potentially opposite ideas that never were opposites in the first place. But there's a kind of automaticity, I think, that scares people away from the creative aspect of the mind. I think Kay Bauer was a person in the 1970s who came up with this idea of effortless experiencing, trying to find the missing link between hypnotizability and creativity. And that was a lot of her research was on that, which I find fascinating, because when I use hypnosis with people, what I love the creativity of the mind with either in a clinical setting, or if I'm doing self-hypnosis or meditation, where things kind of bubble up automatically. It's like you're having a conversation with the parts of the mind that you don't see all the time. And it's this conversation that's, a wonderful way it's scary for some people simply because I think the Western world doesn't have a capacity to call it what it is. I think cultures like the Tibetan culture has a whole system, a scientific way of like looking at how the mind works, and they call it certain things, and it seems mysterious, but it's actually just lying under everyone's nose as they walk around the planet, whether they will or won't, right? I think that creativity will happen whether we will or won't, right? I think that's just one of the wonderful things about the human mind, its potential for regrowth and rebirth, and for changing things up.
It is. And every time we change things, we're in a state of chaos. I wrote about this in an article, The Creative Chaos, because creativity itself is a chaotic state. And Stan takes us throughout his whole book. He shows you points in his life that are times of chaos, and that what happens is you get a new trajectory. Something very new happens, and you get a different path in life. But we see, chaos brings forth the new. I mean, we see it across religions. The Judeo-Christian Bible had creativity. Well, the world is created from chaos. It was created from nothingness, swirling nothingness. And you get this in other cultures too. In Hinduism, the Hiranyagarbha, sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, that was the cosmic egg, was floating on the chaos of the cosmic waters for thousands of years. Everything begins in chaos. Even our New Year's Eve parties are a chaos that brings in the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We are creatures of chaos and creatures of creativity. But I think in the Western world, we are so enmeshed with rationality. And I think that it seems to us that rationality is the path of progress, but it needs to be balanced by the irrationality of the chaos of creativity.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Stan?
Yes, creativity researchers, Tobi is well aware of this, see creativity as a several-step process. First of all, there's an identification of a problem that needs to be solved or a task that needs to be attended to. It can be conscious or it can be unconscious. But that provides the framework. And then there is immersion, where people immerse themselves in what is needed for the creativity to occur. And again, this can be both conscious and unconscious. And then the third step is inspiration. This can be sudden or it can actually take a long time, sometimes months or years. But the inspiration provides the breakthrough, which then leads to an application where things are written out or spoken or attended to in some way. And then finally, evaluation. Look back at the whole process to see what happened and how it can be done better. And so many creativity researchers focus on inspiration as being completely conscious. The value of Tobi's book is to show, no, inspiration oftentimes is very unconscious and can only take place in the creative trance. So, again, I think that Tobi's book and articles and books like it are filling in a gap that's missing from too many models of creativity. Again, remember that to be creative, one has to produce something new to the culture or new to the individual, and useful to the culture, useful to the individual. And that covers such a wide range of topics that I think that we can keep those two parts of the definition in mind as we do more work on the topic.
Yeah, I think you're referring to Wallace's 4-stage model of creativity, and that incubation part is where where most of the unconscious bubbling up or the trance states, not just the finished eureka product, the Archimedes experience. Wouldn't you agree with that, Stan?
Oh, good heavens, yes. The integration is an important part of the application that I mentioned.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have a great deal of difficulty integrating that into their daily life. And sometimes it can happen instantly. Sometimes it really takes a while for that to happen. I think that again, just to give you a random example, Harriet Tubman, the noted woman during slavery days who guided escaped slaves to freedom on her Underground Railroad, she got the information from her dreams. Now, Harriet Tubman is going to be on the $20 bill of the United States very soon, and the official documents that I've read say nothing about her dreams. Robert Moss is a dream researcher. He's written an entire book on Harriet Tubman's dreams and the Underground Railway. So the information is there. It's just that a lot of people simply ignore it and cannot integrate those discoveries of themselves or by others into their worldview. So yes, integration is a very vital part.
And integrating that is important, yes. But in the 4-stage model that Wallace talks about, it's that incubation where you sleep on it and have it kind of bubble up later on in a eureka moment. And that takes time. It's not an outward necessarily focused way of looking at things. I know that in a study that Csikszentmihalyi did, at University of Chicago with Jetzels, or I should say a lot of their graduate students did this, on creativity in creating a very long, I won't go into the description of the study, but one of the things that they noted in the creation of a product from these graduate art students is that they were ranked higher in creativity the longer they actually sat with all of the items to put together for a collage. And so that was that temporal aspect of it. They kind of point to it being that incubation part is so important to creativity, which we kind of toss out, that kind of trance or the ability to sit with one's own mind and thoughts and conscious, unconscious sets. I think like it kind of ratifies what you're saying, Stan, and what your book is about, Tobi. I think even pointing back to then in this rather academic study of creativity, they were pointing to that as being a super important aspect of creativity.
Oh, it absolutely is. And the unconscious is always working. Just as those students were looking at the elements of the collage, we look at our lives. Our lives are collage, and we're constantly immersed in that. And the unconscious never sleeps. And so the unconscious is always working, always working. So what we think of as a eureka moment is actually just the tip of all this work coming into conscious awareness.
Yeah.
And, it's just what you were saying in hypnosis. I find that too, that hypnosis is so creative. With my patients, they come up with the most wonderful things. And that's the same dynamic as having a painting come to life. Because in both instances, the vast unconscious is coming forth with these great riches to the awareness of the conscious mind. And I know as a painter, my best work is not done by me. I mean, my best work is my mistakes, and things I didn't realize. And when I paint, I can listen to words or music and just sometimes when I don't hear anything, my mind just isn't consciously aware of any auditory stimuli. That's when the best work takes place. And to go into these states, I think I speak about a psychological singularity in the book in the last chapter about people who are capable of lifting cars, in states of great stress. But I think this concept of psychological singularity, this going from one phase to another, happens constantly in our lives. And it's generally an unconscious process. But the unconscious is fabulous, and we are really lucky that we have one.
What would our conscious minds do without our unconscious minds?
That's right. What I got this image. I got this image of a puppet, and the conscious mind is the puppet, and the unconscious mind is the word.
Yeah, right. It's the thing controlling things. Yeah,
like this little hand puppet, and that's the conscious mind, and the unconscious is our whole body and our whole connection to the universe. The unconscious is Indira's web, the connected universe.
Yeah.
And, and we communicate to each other through the unconscious also, but of course it's unconscious for the most part. But we're very lucky. We're so fortunate to have these riches within.
How, what's next for the world and the creative trance?
Oh, I'm writing volume 2. I'm doing a
awesome.
book on creative.
Cool.
Oh, thank you, Scott. The creative trance across disciplines and how it would be similar and different in the various creative domains. what would it be like in the word, like listening, writing, speaking, as opposed to visual art, dance, music. And I'm also working on paracosmic worlds, those wonderful worlds we enter when we read a novel or we watch a video or a film. And we are creatures of many worlds. And I'm also going to look at mediumship, and Stan has been wonderful in suggesting sources for that because he's an expert in this. And I'm very interested in creative trance and animals, and all sorts of the clinical creative trance, which you spoke about, and which we deal in every day. I think all of the major clinical modalities actually have a trance state, which is their time of transformation. That's their point of transformation. I mean, we see this, of course,
Yeah, I think that I think Milton Erickson said that hypnosis doesn't cure, but that it creates the atmosphere for curing to happen. And I think that that's a wise thing to say. And I think because, again, people are out of touch with this unconscious conversation that's going on all the time. And that's where the stuck trances happen. Yes.
And that's where people with psychological difficulties can get stuck because they can be overwhelmed by the unconscious.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fear. I think that's a fear throughout our Western society, the possibility of being overwhelmed by the unconscious. And a lot of our superheroes are figures from our unconscious desires, but they control the powers of the unconscious. And,
I think Jeffrey Kripal wrote a book about that. Yeah.
Oh wow! Yeah. What is that? Tell me.
I think it's I don't remember the title of it, but it's basically looking at how superheroes are, the gods showing up from the unconscious, these archetypes kind of showing up in popular culture.
Definitely, and they all become their accomplished self through trauma, which creates chaos in their life, and it bifurcates them to a new path of superhero.
Right, but it's a trauma, the issue that causes them to have to sort of rebirth themselves. Yeah,
exactly. Because you can't make a big change without chaos. You can go from like A to B and make a change, but if you want to go from A all the way to F to B or D, you've got to reorganize yourself. Great changes take great reorganization, and reorganization takes place in chaos. It's deterministic.
Yeah. I think maybe we can kind of wrap up here. I'd like to go on, but I think we probably should put an end point to this. I'm not Joe Rogan, so we're not going to go for 5 hours here, which is okay, I guess. But I could go on a lot, and I'd like to have both of you back on separately or together. It'd be great at some point in time. I did throw out a question when I kind of handed out some questions before we started to kind of give a framework for this. I don't know if this is a fair question or if it's one that's already kind of been answered or you've asked each other already. If you could ask each other one question about trance and creativity, what would it be?
Stanley is so knowledgeable. I think any question I asked him, he would know the answer for.
But what would the question be if you had what's on your mind from this like what's bubbling up to the surface right now?
Stanley, and your wonderful writings bring us all information about parapsychology and other things. How can we respect our dreams in the West the way indigenous people respect them? I know you've done really excellent work on indigenous people and the respect for dreams. How can we do this? I mean, Freud brought it somewhere, he said dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. But how can we do this more in daily life? Respect our unconscious and our dreams.
I think that your focus on the future of creativity that you mentioned a few minutes ago, very important. I mentioned artificial intelligence at the beginning of our interview, and we really don't know the full effects of artificial intelligence. Yes, it's going to be a game changer, and let's hope it's more to the positive than to the negative. But I think artificial intelligence is going to be one of many technological discoveries and technologies that will shape our future, especially the future of new ideas and creativity, evaluation, and integration. Also, the reemergence of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is going to impact creativity. I think it will be a while before there will be extensive research on psychedelics and creativity, simply too controversial, but there are any numbers of anecdotal reports that indicate this potential. Sir Francis Crick indicated that it was during a mild ILSC session that he visualized the double helix that revolutionized the study of genetics. Well, it'll be interesting to see how these events play out in the future. And I think that your questions, Scott, and your answers, Tobi, provide us with an illustrious roadmap of what way we might be going.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to? And thank you so much for complimenting the questions and partaking in both of you partaking in this conversation that we can share with other people and hopefully will trigger some more creative activities on their part.
I would like to say, as a person who has had disabilities my whole life, I'm dyslexic, I have attention deficit disorder. Until I had an operation on my eyes, I was legally blind without my glasses. So I've always liked to write about that area and have great compassion for that because of my own life. But I want people to know that it doesn't stop them and that difficulties and disabilities can shape a life for the better. And Leonardo da Vinci was severely dyslexic. They think the type of dyslexia was surface dysgraphia. He had severe ADHD. He couldn't go to college. He was not, in university, it was all in Latin. He couldn't learn Latin as a dyslexic person, although he tried in childhood, again, adulthood. But not being able to go to school pushed him to the natural world. And he says, I'm not going to quote other people. I'm going to be a direct observer. And he was one of the great observers in the history of art, a great anatomist, a great painter. And he codified a lot of his observations in his notebook. And had he been able to, had he not been dyslexic and been able to learn Latin, he would have probably been a notary like his father, which was a cross between an accountant and a lawyer. But we never would have had the Mona Lisa.
Yeah. Well, I tend to feel that categorizing some of the neurodivergence that's considered to be disordered or a disease of sorts, I don't think that's correct. I think it's more of a it's a fault of the medical model for seeing that and for seeing things as basically it's a problem with the educational system. It's not the fault of the child. It's the fault of the educational system for not figuring out how to be creative and adaptive to everybody's needs to help them learn and grow and be nurtured.
Completely agree.
Yeah. So
I think that this is a good time to remind ourselves that there are so many varieties of creativity. Our colleague Ruth Richards came up with the term everyday creativity, creativity in everyday life, and how this differs with the Leonardo da Vinci type of creativity, which has world-changing implications. Yes, creativity in everyday life can make changes for individual or small groups. And so we cannot neglect everyday creativity. It's the type of creativity that most people will have access to one way or another.
Yes, yeah.
That's what Ruth Richards shows us so much, that so much is creative. Gardening is creative. Building furniture for your home is creative. We, as she points out, we survive through everyday creativity.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's as I was mentioning earlier, Stan, in your article, you do mention that creativity as a word doesn't really exist in many indigenous cultures. It just, I guess it's part of the warp and the weave of life in some cultures.
Yes, I think that creativity, in many respects, is a social construction. And if a culture does not have a word for creativity, maybe they have other types of words to take its place. But on the other hand, it might be that they live in a culture where there's absolutely no room for creativity, where something innovative is discouraged and punished. And we have examples of that up to the present day. I know of an artist who spent a lot of time doing drawings instead of tending to homework and schoolwork, and her punishment was to be taken away from all of the art supplies so that she could focus on her academic work. Unfortunately, she never took up painting again. So the social environment, as well as the cultural environment, is very necessary for creativity to survive. And
yes, yeah.
I interviewed another young woman who had very protective parents, and when they went several doors down to witness a fire on a house, they would not take her along. They thought the process would be too devastating for her. So she went out of her body and saw the fire anyway. And when her parents came back, she gave them a literal description of what happened in the fire. And they said, "You disobeyed us. You sneaked away, so we're going to punish you." So they restricted her activities in many, many ways. Never had an out-of-body experience again.
Which, is kind of in the realm of creativity and trance, absolutely. But it also, it points to the need for nurturing these capabilities and understanding that they are there.
It was our colleague, Michael Ahrens, former chair of the psychology department at West Georgia University, who actually introduced the word creativity into the French vocabulary. He was a student at the Sorbonne and was surprised that there was no such word as creativity. There were other words, of course, that substitute, because the French, of course, have a wonderful tradition of many types of creativity. But he actually got it introduced into the French literature many years ago. So, naming something and labeling something is a very important step in creativity in terms of knowing what we're dealing with and how to conceptualize what we're dealing with.
Okay. Well, any last thoughts before we close out today?
Just like to thank you for bringing this information to the greater public. It's a real service.
Well, I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't seen you and Stan provide this information at APA this year in DC. I was very happy to see that Division 30, and I think Division 32 was part of that, combined efforts, humanistic psychology and the Society for Psychological Hypnosis. And also your wonderful book. I wouldn't have found out about your book if I had had this book years ago when I was working on my dissertation. I could have said, "See, Steve Kahn, who was my chair at the time. See, Steve, look, what can I do?" And I probably would have added more to the literature review. There's a lot of beautiful stuff there. But I mean, it really is a wonderful book. And Stan, your article, of course, is a wonderful classic article that holds test of time. Rereading it about every 5 or 6 years, I pull the Trance and the Trickster out and I reread it and go, wow, that's so much. I find something new in it every time I read it. Stan, do you have any closing thoughts?
Oh, good heavens, you're very complimentary to my little article. But I think that your listeners and viewers might start following an interesting debate that's occurring in the field of consciousness studies. Not a new idea, but one that is now being mentioned more and more often. And that is that consciousness is actually fundamental to our existence. Mm-hmm. Mainstream psychology says the brain creates consciousness. No, this new view, consciousness creates brain and everything else. There's a whole consciousness substrate to the entire cosmos, and it manifests itself in different ways, in different times, in different cultures. Now, of course, the implications are important because this supports Carl Gustav Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and the archetypes that pop up in people's dreams, fantasies, and indeed their creativity, bringing about information that there's no logical way that they could have come up with. So I think that the topic that we're discussing is very timely, and your listeners and viewers can now keep in touch with some of the developments in this very important field.
Excellent. Well, it is important. Creativity is important. Trance is important. And both are fundamental with consciousness. So on that, I'd like to say thank you for both of you taking the time out on a Friday afternoon or morning if you're on the East and the West Coast. And thank you again. The book is The Creative Trance, Altered States of Consciousness and the Creative Process by Tobi Zausner. And the article, of course, is Trance and the Trickster by Dr. Stan Krippner. And the new book is A Chaotic Life, which will be due out in bookstores in September.
I'll believe it when I see it. You know how unpredictable publishers are.
I've seen a very cool cover of the book. I've seen the cover, and I've seen the parenthetical blurbs about how great it is. So I believe it. It will be out soon. I have faith. Okay. Well, thank you both for coming, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for your good questions. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.